Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of December 2014, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And of course, behind the technical desk is Nick Green. It's cold. It was blowing a gale last night, certainly down in the West Country. And I had a pretty mucky drive back from Nottingham. So we saw the weather across most of the country, few trees down here in Plymouth, so there were some strong winds, unless they were actually blown over by the force of the weather bomb, Mike.
It is fascinating, the new terms which are making an appearance even in meteorology.
We can't just call it a storm.
No.
It was a weather bomb, so the trees were blown up as opposed to blown over. And presumably somebody's going to be reporting this bomb to the security services at some stage.
Were any domestic terrorists involved?
Well, in my local village, I didn't see any associated with the tree. But we will speak to Theresa May's team a little bit later if she's not too busy. And across the country, we've got cloudy, overcast and drizzle in Suffolk, hailstones in Rhyl, and sunny but cold in Swansea. So there we are. Over to you.
Okay, well, we're starting off with the Bank of England. Because in 1997, when Tony Blair was elected to government, the price of his winning that election was the so-called independence of the Bank of England. Of course, the bank has always been independent of government, despite so-called nationalisation. But there were some things that it couldn't do, for example, setting interest rates. So as soon as Blair became Prime Minister, his great friend and colleague, who only 10 years later would make himself known as the global Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced that the bank would gain its independence, and that happened in 1998. This was not an issue that was ever mentioned prior to the election, just like Britain's 50-year defence pact with the French, foisted on an unwitting nation immediately following the 2010 election by David Cameron. The change in the relationship between the state and the bank was just announced, and we all just had to live with it. The change established the Monetary Policy Committee, which was given the role of setting interest rates in order to keep inflation within a target band. And while the decisions on interest rates had been made by the Chancellor prior to that, there was at least some notion of accountability, even though how interest rate decisions were arrived at was never divulged. But once the responsibility for interest rate setting was passed to the Monetary Policy Committee, the Chancellor gained slopey shoulder syndrome, I can't say that, slopey shoulder syndrome and not my problem, Gov. So accountability shifted to the Governor of the bank, and it was a real accountability, Brian, unbelievable accountability, because from that time on, the Governor was required to write a letter to the Chancellor in the event that inflation fell outside the target band, and he had to write explaining why that had happened, and that's it. That is the scope of the accountability. Like Chancellors current and past, the Monetary Policy Committee just didn't feel the need to let anyone know how their interest rate decisions were arrived at. Well, yesterday the bank published its independent report and this independent report was written by the former Federal Reserve Board Governor, Kevin Warsh. Very independent, as you can imagine, because of course he was not a member of the Club of Central Bankers. So maybe it's hardly surprising that this publication doesn't change very much. And in fact, in the past, the minutes of the Monetary Policy Committee meetings, which had been no more than a list of bullet points, because the transcripts of those meetings, they are currently shredded and burned. So those will continue to be a list of bullet points. So any minutes from the Monetary Policy Committee meetings will continue to be exactly as they are. The only change with regard to those minutes that will come into force from next August is that the list of bullet points will be made available at the time the interest rate is announced rather than 2 weeks later. The other change that's been announced is that instead of shredding and burning the meeting transcripts, they will be held and then published 8 years after the event. So in other words, nothing changes in practice other than we find out when it no longer matters. We find out, at a time that it no longer matters whether any members of the Monetary Policy Committee said anything different when behind closed doors in the meeting, as opposed to what they were stating in public. Now, Mark Carnage, the Governor of the Bank of England, said the bank now has immense responsibilities for monetary stability, financial stability, and for microprudential regulation. And with these responsibilities comes the need for effective transparency, genuine accountability, and robust governance. Today, I'm pleased to announce the most significant change, a set of changes to how we present and explain our interest rate decisions since the Monetary Policy Committee was formed in 1997. Alongside these measures, we have also proposed a number of additional changes which will mark a step change in the governance of this institution. These changes will enhance our transparency and make us more accountable to the British people. So just get that last line again. It's going to make us more accountable to the British people. Well, Mark, I've got one question, in fact, one word for you. How? So anybody got any explanations or?
I was just here smiling at the thought of closed-door meetings, no proper minutes. Sounds a bit Chatham House common purpose to me, and the thought of somebody simply writing a little note which affects ultimately the procedure affects the notes, the lives of millions of people. But you write a little note saying, well, we got it wrong.
Yeah.
It's getting very hard to report the news in Britain because people think it's a comedy show. We're just simply saying what these people are actually talking about.
Yeah. Okay, and moving on then. On Monday, I mentioned this article in the Financial Times. The banks are squealing hard about the fines being passed out to them for their continuing fraud and corruption, whether it be LIBOR, drug money laundering, or the foreign exchange scandal. The banks have had enough of paying out the so-called regulators. Well, the regulator, as we reported on Monday, has decided that from the next financial year, that regime of fines will change, and they will try to coordinate their activity with other regulators. And perhaps that change isn't coming soon enough for Barclays because, sorry.
I was just going to say, is the soaring level of fines associated with the dropping level of bankers?
Could be. But that's an interesting question, right? Okay, well, anyway, Barclays then, because the Department of Financial Services in New York has uncovered evidence suggesting that Barclays and Deutsche Bank may have developed algorithms to manipulate foreign exchange markets. So what they're saying here is that it's not so much a case of individual traders making individual trading decisions, but that Barclays and Deutsche Bank actually wrote this into computer software and made it a systematic, automatic thing.
Was the chairman of Barclays was
Marcus Agius, yeah.
Agius, who just happened to be paid £47,000 a year for 28 days' work by the BBC? So it's one Robert Peston might like to pick up on.
Yes. Now this is particularly bad news for Barclays because, of course, they were not part of the £2.7 billion settlement that was recently announced over this foreign exchange scam, and they are continue to be investigated not only by the Department of Financial Services but also the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK over that fraud. And in fact, Barclays opted out. They chose to opt out of that £2.7 billion settlement in inverted commas, and well, maybe they're hoping that there's going to be some kind of January sale or something on fines. But they certainly haven't opted for that. But good news, because HSBC have lost the head of foreign exchange trading. This is Stuart Scott, and he is left a month after they paid £389 million of the £2.7 billion fines. That was their share. And this follows two other people leaving, currency traders leaving HSBC. No one's in prison, though, yet.
No, of course not, because they've been fined or they've written letters apologising.
Yes.
Or they've committed suicide.
Yes, shame. Okay, moving on. UK banks, according to the FT today, are going to face more fines for illegal migrant accounts. So what they're saying here is that banks and building societies that open accounts for known illegal immigrants will face fines or even criminal sanctions under new powers to come into force today. And this is part of a Home Office strategy, according to the FT, to make life in the UK more hostile to foreigners without visas. So according to the Immigration Minister, James Brokenshire, he said, these changes as part of the Immigration Act will make Britain a less attractive place for those who come here for the wrong reasons and allow us to remove more people when they have no right to remain. So, well, the question that I have is, well, what effect will that have on the rest of us? Because it's already becoming increasingly difficult to open a bank account. You need to jump through all kinds of personal information, personal data related hoops. This is clearly going to add another layer of nonsense to the process. Perhaps we need to find alternatives to using commercial banks at all.
And we could bring in the Bradbury pound, take away a lot of power from them.
Well, indeed, exactly. Right, and well, here we've got the EU saying that the UK standard of living has risen to 4th highest in the EU. So the UK standard of living has climbed to the joint 4th highest within the European Union. We're now ahead of the Netherlands, significantly ahead of France, Italy, and Spain, and this is according to Eurostat, the official office, the statistical office, of the EU. Now, the UK standard of living in 2013 was 15% higher than the average for the 28 member states, and it was up one place than the year before. So
all the charity shops that I see as I travel around UK, that's all my imagination, and the boarded up shops, the closed pubs, the redundant buildings. This is what life's like in the fourth most successful nation in the EU.
Right. Well, what we've got to understand here, of course, is this is relative. And so what they're actually doing is they're taking an average of the 28 member states and they're saying relative to that average. What we're actually seeing is the collapse of other European countries happening faster than the collapse of the UK. And so we appear to move up the league tables, but of course we're all collapsing. So it doesn't really, it's just a measure of the rate of collapse. But of course, this is a consumption-based measure, and so the apparent relative change in the rate of collapse between us and other European countries is, of course, also relative to the amount of debt. And of course, because we're still on a debt binge in this country, then we appear to be doing better than other countries, but in fact, we're not.
Right.
So there you go.
Okay, well...
So that's it for finance.
Okay, thanks for that. Well, where's some of the money going? We can probably help the situation by having a look at this little headline here. Of course, the topic is child protection. Child protection has become very big in a very limited way. We'll explain that a bit in a minute. But here's the BBC headline: Greater Manchester Police must improve child protection. Sounds good until we get into the meat of it. But I just thought I'd point out, what did that building cost as a police headquarters? It looks like a mini version of the
Strasbourg.
Strasbourg, yeah, you've got it. Greater Manchester Police, buildings like that. This is where the money's going. Well, what are the police up to? Well, there's been a report that says there's been delays in 8 out of 36 cases that HM Inspector of Constabulary Mike Cunningham selected, and he said there were instances of children being unnecessarily detained in custody overnight, and he wants to see that addressed. Now, that's clearly a major priority in view of the fact that we still haven't got to the bottom of the abuse by members of Parliament, the establishment in Elm Guesthouse. We haven't got to the bottom of what was going on in Rotherham or North Wales, but no, he selected 36 cases and there were delays. And then Greater Manchester Police have apparently got 563 people working in its public protection division, responsible for investigating child protection, domestic abuse, vulnerable adult abuse, registered sex offender, and investigation of rape and other sex offences. But we just don't seem to be able to break down any of these big rings, particularly when they're involved with Westminster. So quite a few £1 million disappearing in that little building. Maybe they should be spending a little less on flagpoles and a bit more on paper and pens. And thank you for the person who drew our attention back to this one. Now, this is going back to 2013, but the headline was social workers investigated over child abuse claims, and they won damages. So 2 social workers were investigated by Haringey Council over claims they'd mistreated their daughter. This all went into court. And turned out that the tip-off had been malicious, and they got awarded £2,000 compensation. And I think why this was sent through to us, of course, is it's miraculous that these two social workers got compensation, but on a weekly basis. We've got parents going into court on the basis of malicious tip-offs, and they never even get their costs for the court case. So we've got more public money circulating here, vast amounts of money for social services, who I'm sorry to say are not protecting children. Some good people are trying, but basically we've got the children being used as profit-making centres. And here's the courts running more public money. This is where it's disappearing. And where are they getting more from?
Well, indeed. Where is the money coming from? It's coming from parking fines. So this is councils making a £600 million profit, according to the Public Finance website, although on the rest of the article they use the word surplus or excess instead of profit. And they're saying that councils in England made a total surplus of £667 million from parking charges and fines in 2013-2014. And that's as a result of an analysis by the RAC Foundation that's up, of course, on previous years. And according to the RAC Foundation director, parking profits seem to be a one-way street for councils, having risen annually for the last 5 years. Yet over the same period, spending on local roads has fallen by about a fifth in real terms. Of course, the councils had something else to say. The local government association transport spokesman Peter Box said it was not true to say councils made a profit from parking because all the money goes back into transport schemes, is what he's saying, like potholes, which I'm sure everybody that's watching this programme will agree are becoming fewer and fewer every week. Not.
Yeah, I had to think about that for a moment, having jolted down some of the roads yesterday. Definitely pothole free.
Yeah.
Well, think about this. We've got the local authorities now simply fining people. They're making up the law on the hoof. And we've got Britain's police forces now moving into local authority accommodation. We've got the local police force sharing offices with your local city council. It's starting to happen in Plymouth.
That makes them independent.
Makes everybody independent, but as we watch the corruption grow in Britain's local authorities across the country, the police are now moving in to joint accommodation with the council. And I believe that locally here in Plymouth, one senior police officer said, well, I'm basically now spending 98% of my time in this building. And he was referring to the Plymouth City Council offices. So we're seeing rapidly a complete breakdown of any independence the police have. Let's have a think about what the impact is on serious police investigations. Well, first of all, a bit of good news, because yesterday was the sentencing for child abuse victim and whistleblower Melanie Shaw at Nottingham Crown Court. And Melanie came out of court with a 3-year probation order on her. This was partly unclear because apparently it's simply going to be the probation service that decide what rules she's got to adhere to. And of course, people should be aware that the probation service throughout the country is rapidly being privatised. So we're going to gently ask, could it be that Melanie Shaw will have to do as a private company tells her in the future? But nevertheless, good news that she wasn't put back into prison. She's been released. So here's a picture of Melanie and some of the people who very kindly travelled quite some distance to be at that court case. Melanie centre stage there. But we're going to take you through the background to Melanie Shaw's case and put together some of the key pieces so that our audience today can actually judge what is really going on with child abuse, what was going on with Beechwood child abuse, and what the position of the police now is, and indeed what the position of the mainstream media. So let's see if we can take you through a UK column wiring diagram. Well, here we go. So Melanie Shaw, first of all, whistleblows on her own abuse and wider child abuse at Beechwood home in Nottingham. And she states very clearly that alongside particularly vile sexual and physical abuse of children, there were children who were being suicided, and she maintains that children were also murdered on the site. So as a result of her whistleblowing, Nottinghamshire police start what they called Operation Daybreak, and very quickly there were further victims coming forward. Eventually there were sufficient victims that it forced Nottingham City and county councils to start paying out compensation, and some £250,000 was paid out to some 25 victims. So there can be no doubt that abuse was taking place because the council was paying out compensation. But of course, this is a civil court action, which is effectively trying to buy people off. This is not criminal action to bring the perpetrators of the abuse to book. So Melanie Shaw, around this time, receives what she describes as a friendly warning. And that warning was that if she kept speaking out about the child abuse around Beechwood Home, they will take her son. And the friendly part of this is Melanie herself believes she was being told this to help her. It wasn't being given as a direct threat, but let's see what then subsequently happened. Because very quickly, Melanie is harassed by social services, and after a report into social services by one of her neighbours, social services then indeed take her son, and he's later put into foster care. The social services also quickly try and brand Melanie as mentally ill, and there is an attempt to section her. Melanie later comes down to visit the UK column to tell her story. She gives us a graphic account of not only her own abuse of Beechwood, but that of other children. And again, she says point blank that children were being suicided, and she had reason to believe that a significant number of children were murdered. At about this time, the judge decided that the civil compensation claims would be stopped until Nottingham Police had completed their Operation Daybreak. So the civil action was effectively put on hold because we were led to believe that the police were going to carry through their investigation under Daybreak. And Nottingham Police then stated that over 90 children were likely to have been abused at Beechwood, but despite that, the police failed to carry out a full forensic investigation of the site, and despite the significant number of documented suicides, they failed to start any form of murder investigation. And shortly after that, the council then sold the Beechwood site not to an independent third party, but somebody with whom they were working in partnership. Well, where does it go from there? Well, Melanie was then to discover that Nottinghamshire police were lying over their Daybreak investigation, and she had particular evidence that where the police said they were interviewing people, that was simply not possible. And then things started to turn nasty, because it's about this time that Melanie is accused of arson in setting fire to a neighbour's garden shed and carrying out criminal damage at their house. That's throwing paint at a wall. But we have discovered that 999 police call logs show nothing to do with a call for a serious fire. And surprisingly, there's no mention of the fire on Nottinghamshire Fire Service web-based records. There were also incorrect police and press reports at that time as to the date of the fire, and investigation by supporters for UK Column who interviewed neighbours found that they couldn't actually remember fire appliances being there for 2 hours during the night. Well, Melanie was charged nonetheless, and then she was bailed with a restriction on approaching her neighbours. But Melanie's neighbour then came to her own house, which forced Melanie to call the police to say that she had somebody on her doorstep with whom she was not allowed to have any contact. Having made that report, Melanie was asked to report to the police, but when she reported to Nottinghamshire Police, she was arrested and held in secret until the UK column reported her as a missing and highly vulnerable person. And at that point, Nottinghamshire Police then admitted they'd got her in custody. So Melanie then goes on to be held under brutal conditions at Sodexo prison in Peterborough. She was there for 3 months. She was bullied. She was put in solitary confinement. And perhaps most unpleasantly, she had absolutely no proper treatment for a very serious leg ulcer, nor did she receive her normal medication. Well, at Nottingham Crown Court, Melanie was subsequently found guilty of arson, reckless, and criminal damage. Those present witnessed flawed evidence. No mention made of the fact that there was ongoing arson in the area, arson which had been carried on a regular basis over at least a year and was ongoing. That didn't come into the court at all. There was no fire expert called to talk about the fire. There was no defence character witnesses brought forward for Melanie. Her long-term psychiatrist was not called into court to talk on her mental state. The handwriting expert brought in by the Crown Prosecution Service could not confirm that her findings were beyond all reasonable doubt, i.e. it was Melanie's handwriting beyond all reasonable doubt, and the police simply failed to investigate the numerous other fingerprints that were found at the scene of the crime. Many of the public present said that the judge was sleeping at least one point during the trial, but the same judge told the jury and indeed the court that Nottinghamshire Police Operation Daybreak is, quote, a conspiracy theory. Well, where did this lead us? It took us on to Melanie being placed on remand and kept tagged and under a night curfew. It's then resulted in Melanie being sentenced at Crown Court yesterday to 3 years control by probation. And significantly, the judge did not refer to any reports by Melanie's own long-term psychiatrist. He relied on a report written while she was under great duress in HM Prison Peterborough, where a psychiatrist said after a 1-hour assessment that he considered that she was possibly, she was certainly mentally ill and delusional. So the judge yesterday focused on that, and he said, because I accept, Melanie Shaw, you're mentally ill and delusional, I'm not going to send you to prison. I'm going to give you the 3-year probation order. Well, of course, the effect of this is that Theresa May, the Crown Prosecution Service and the British State have achieved their aim of bullying and intimidating a child abuse witness and whistleblower, Melanie Shaw. And of course, they've now achieved a very important aim that they can undermine her credibility as a child abuse witness by falsely branding her as delusional. So welcome to David Cameron's world. Nottingham Police claim at the moment that Operation Daybreak still exists, but we understand from people very close to the police that all they're really doing at the moment is delegating a bit of investigation to officers when they can be spared. So we're going to say just follow the track record of what has actually taken place around Melanie Shaw. 90 child abuse victims at Beechwood, and we've got a senior High Court judge saying there's conspiracy theory, and we've got one of the key whistleblowers now victimised and branded as delusional. It's outrageous. It is David Cameron's Conservative Britain in 2014, and of course we'll mention her again in a minute, Theresa May, absolutely responsible for what's gone on here. So outside the court, it was fascinating that I'm going to call him a very grey gentleman turned up. Here he is circled. We understand this man was a plainclothes Nottingham police officer. We also believe that he is part of Operation Daybreak, But of course, nobody knew why he was there. He didn't declare why he was there. So we're going to say duties unknown. If anybody can give us any more information, we'd like to receive it. So what did the local press got to say? Well, it was alleged that the Nottingham Post cannot report on the Beechwood child abuse case due to, well, they didn't quite say pressure, dialogue with the local authorities and Nottingham Police. So it seems that there in Nottingham, you can't actually get out there and do investigative journalism and report the truth, because you have to have permission by Nottingham City Council and Nottinghamshire Police, who are sharing the same offices. I'm not sure on that. We'll find out. So here's the lady at the back. And of course, what has Theresa May been up to? Well, the Mail headline says it all. Police won't need judges. It's okay for the police to snoop on reporters. They're saying the Home Office is now embroiled in fresh press freedom row after sneaking out plans which allow the police to make their own decision that they're going to snoop into the phone calls of reporters. And indeed, it's not just reporters, because it doesn't even matter if you're an MP. So this is some of the meat of it. Proposals unveiled by the Home Secretary Theresa May made clear that police forces could continue to authorise their own investigations, applications for journalist telecoms data under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. The new acquisition and disclosure of Communications Data Code of Practice also states that the phone records of journalists, lawyers, and even MPs are not exempt. So your local inspector who's sharing an office with the local city council can decide if he's going to tap into your phone. Well, Tory MP David Davis said the new proposed codes of practice fall far short of what is required without judicial oversight of the process, with full judicial consideration for any request to handle any confidential or privileged information. We're likely to see more of the sort of abuses that have become so unfortunately commonplace. The rules were improper. This is an inappropriate and improper ruling. It could, for example, put whistleblowers at risk. Well, they don't need to tap phones, because we've just demonstrated with Melanie Shaw what they could do. UK column has been warning about Theresa May creating a vicious dictatorship under our noses, in fact, under her nose in this particular slide. And it's time for people to speak out. BBC, meanwhile, clearly worried. No reports from the BBC about Melanie Shaw. We spoke to them this morning and received a bizarre response. So the UK column called BBC Nottingham simply to ask why the BBC was not reporting the Melanie Shaw case, or indeed child abuse in Nottingham. And when we told the lady who answered the phone, we will be reporting at 1 o'clock, she claimed that we were threatening her. It's a most unbelievable telephone call. However, a little bit later, they seem to have changed their mind. So the BBC said, well, we have been reporting on what's a very complicated story, but for legal reasons, there are certain things we can't report, but it's ongoing, and we'll continue to report where and how we, BBC, can. So BBC, very, very squeamish on the subject of Nottingham child abuse. They can't report. Why do we think that is? Legal teams? Governmental pressure?
All of the above.
Child abusers in positions of power in the BBC? The imagination runs riot. Well, here's the man who presumably controls what comes across the news in the BBC, Keith Blackmore. He's responsible for handling talent negotiations as well, but he's the current affairs man. He's on a mere 160 grand. What sort of thing does he get up to? Well, with his big boss, Tony Hall, who's in the picture top right, they've been at dinners to help improve diversity for young journalists within journalism.
Right.
Okay.
Does that mean they get diverse range of meat products on the table?
Well, clearly the BBC is driving on its £3.7 billion budget some really deep investigative journalism. into the abuse of children. That is when they are not, of course, helping the government to cover up for torture. So we've been very interested to see the sorts of things the BBC has been saying. They're very keen on this little picture here, a small number of protesters outside Parliament demonstrating against the use of torture by the Americans. What's Mr. Cameron been saying? Well, he's used a spokesman to say that he was not aware of any requests from the UK for redactions to the Senate Intelligence Committee report. Of course, Mr. Cameron's been away over in Turkey. And Cameron comes back to a report by retired Judge Sir Peter Gibson. And Sir Peter had said that Britain had been, well, inappropriately involved in the rendition and ill treatment of terror suspects. Notice there's no mention of the word torture there. He found no evidence that officers had been directly involved in the torture or rendition of suspects, but raised 27 questions the Intelligence and Security Committee was considering. So if you read through this, the BBC doing a really fine job of drifting out this subject. No proper investigation into Cameron, Blair, Brown, Straw, Miliband and Clegg. And these are some of their other headlines here. CIA interrogations report sparks prosecution calls, nothing about prosecution of British MPs, and Britain spoke to US before publication.
I'm sure they did. I'm sure they were wondering what was in.
Well, if you see what Cameron does, he puts all the blame onto the field officers. Did the field officers do anything? Well, of course...
Wasn't that what Tony Blair did with the Yellow Cake intelligence report?
It was.
Yes.
So just slope your shoulder a bit. And, of course, the politicians, nowhere near the child abuse. No politician has ever been in Elm Guest House, never been near the torture, and probably not associated with the bankers. War.
Indeed. So following on from that then, this is the Polish defense minister who is claiming unprecedented Russian activity in the Baltic region. He's saying that Russian Navy and Air Force activity is unprecedented, and he's saying that most of the activity is involving Russian operations in international waters, and that Sweden is the country most affected. So I guess they're trying to keep the nonsense about the alleged submarine in Swedish waters going. He said that he said that Poland sees Russia's show of military strength as an attempt to test NATO, and he said it doesn't help to build good relations and trust. He made these comments in an interview with TVN24, and in their more general report, they said that on Monday, NATO F-16s taking part in a Baltic air policing mission had intercepted 2 Russian Su-34 bombers. So it's okay for...
Policing?
Yes, indeed. So it's okay for... Does that mean that there's a no-fly zone? Is that what they're really saying? But anyway, on Sunday last, NATO had said that Russian military activity had been considerable in recent months. They said such activity can be destabilizing and potentially dangerous if international norms are not respected. So I wonder how much of the international norms are being respected here, because RT is reporting that this train, carrying a whole column, as they describe it, of American armoured vehicles, has been caught in camera in Latvia. They're saying that the railway station that this was parked at was only a few hundred, 300 kilometres away. What is that in miles? 200 miles away from the Russian border. Carrying at least 38 vehicles, several semi-trailers, including 8 Bradley fighting vehicles, 9 M113 armoured personnel carriers, 4 petrol tankers, heavy expanded mobile tactical trucks, high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles, and M88 Hercules armory recovery vehicles, a couple of trucks, some tactical engineering and medical vehicles, and at least 4 containers and a pair of rail cars with ammunition. So what we seem to have here is the Western media promoting the notion that Russia is acting inappropriately, while in the meantime, Russia Today reporting that NATO is acting inappropriately. What we actually have is NATO being the aggressor, and I maintain that allegation that NATO is being the aggressor in this case, is driving Russia to act in a particular way. This is an extremely dangerous situation, with both sides now openly increasing activity along what might be described as a front, and very dangerous, Brian.
I think it is, and the thing which is interesting for many of us, I'm going to say, here in the UK column side is that you think back to the Cold War and what the supposed position was, and now you just watch the pressure coming on from the European Union with the help of NATO, but you dumb it down. So it's not a military intervention, it's a policing operation.
Yes.
It's a policing operation, but you're going to move military vehicles. And of course, let's remember it was David Cameron and that NATO summit in South Wales where they were talking behind closed doors about the need to move material and munitions up to advanced posts in Eastern Europe in order to be prepared. So the situation is getting very dangerous. But if you've got liars, fraudsters, cheats running the show with a little bit of child abuse thrown in, which seems to be the position for the establishment in Britain and Western Europe, these people are what? Psychopathic?
Yeah.
Not to be trusted.
Okay, so London should break free from Little England. Quite emotive language here from Philip Stevens, who's an associate editor of the Financial Times, ex-Oxford, ex-Reuters. And he wrote a biography on Tony Blair called The Making of a World Leader. So perhaps that gives a clue as to what he's on about. He's suggesting that the M25 orbital motorway would be a ready-made border. So I'm just going to read a little bit of this. London does not need a mayor. It needs a prime minister. Britain is fracturing. Scotland may yet quit the Union and England turn its back on Europe. The Conservatives are throwing up barricades against the immigrants who are the capital's lifeblood. The world's most vibrant capital city cannot entrust its fate to Little England. This is a moment to imagine a different future. Independence. The economics of independence speak for themselves. With a population of 8.5 million, London accounts for more than a fifth of Britain's gross domestic product and generates a big chunk of the tax revenues. This gives it an economy about the size of Sweden. Unemployment is less than 3%. The demographic profile is more youthful than the rest of the UK. Tourists spend £20 billion each year in the capital. And then he goes on to say, the M25 orbital motorway is ready-made. It's the ready-made frontier, providing access into the city and fast connections to the rest of England. I don't know what planet he's living on. The roads on and off ramps are perfect sites for border control posts, though in this digital age, electronic surveillance and recognition devices would replace old-fashioned immigration queues. The identity chips now embedded in passports could readily be adapted to car windscreens. And he finishes off by saying the new state would join the EU, lifting the threat to the health of its global financial institutions and other professional services, free of the influence of Europhobes, including Nigel Farage. It would join the border-free Schengen area, ensuring its doors remain open to Polish doctors, Italian designers and French mathematicians. For a time at least, London would keep the pound. The rest of England would be free to share the currency. So it's really hard as you read. I do recommend that everybody reads the whole article. I've just taken 4 snippets out of it there. It's very hard to know whether it's supposed to be a satirical piece. I suspect it isn't.
I think it's nudging, Mike. This is to get the idea into people's... This is the city-state, isn't it? This is in European planning that London was not to be the capital city anymore. It was to be a city-state region of the EU.
Absolutely. So I'm not. I'm just saying that as you read it, it's hard not to think that it's a satirical piece. The guy is on a different planet, as I say. But he's not alone, because here we've got Hilary Benn and Sadiq Khan again pushing the rhetoric for English MPs, English laws, the breakup of the union. It's really ironic that they finished the first paragraph here saying, "And Labour has led the fight to defend the union and will continue to do so." I'm not clear how you actually continue to defend the union at the same time that you break it up. But look, this is all part and parcel of a constitutional reform agenda. And as we mentioned the other day, with regard to the grand jury on the child abuse issue, one of the other areas to be covered at the coming conference in February, March and last day of February, first day of March, is the constitutional reform agenda, and I'm going to take people through that and explain what we need to do about that. It's a pretty significant part of what's going on around us at the moment, and so please get along to that conference if you can.
Brilliant. Doing something is the most important thing for all of us. And I'll just say once again, thank you very much to all the people that have supported Melanie Shaw. You've written letters, you've badgered MPs, you've put pressure on Theresa May and David Cameron. You've donated money, you've saved the life, I think, of that young lady. As a result, we're able to get more truth out about the sheer scale of the child abuse in Britain and the cover-up by the British establishment. We've got Mickey Summers out there trying to do his best to get more evidence out of the abuse in the Nottingham and other areas. We've got an Andrew. There are many, many people out there. But what has made the difference is that people are now getting out of those cosy chairs and starting to really do something. And one of the old sayings that we've used for some time is action conquers fear. So if you're sitting there watching this lot begin to develop and close in on you, if you feel that's what's happening, the best way of countering that is to get out there and do something, however small. Quite a few comments in the chat room there talking about how serious things are. Unbelievably serious. We've got massive fraud and corruption now within the civil service and the public sector. We've got the police simply lying. They're involved in the corruption. They're covering up the abuse of children. And now they're going to be hacking the phones of journalists. It's up to us to stop this. We can just have a wry smile here that many people, organisations, when we call them up and say that we're calling from the UK column, they'll say to us, well, you're not proper journalists. So presumably if we're not proper journalists, the police won't be hacking our telephones because we're not journalists.
You would hope so.
You would hope so.
Yeah.
There we are. So that's the cheerful note for the weekend. What we got tonight?
Doomwatch 6 p.m. Now, anybody that's wondering where Patrick Henningsen has been, he is still in the United States, and unfortunately he's in a time zone which means that he is, shall we say, reluctant to come on the lunchtime news programme.
That's a beauty sleep issue, I believe.
I believe it is. So he will be on Doomwatch tonight at 6 p.m. For the full 2 hours, so you'll get to see whether the beauty sleep has helped or not.
Good.
Yeah.
That's it from us today. We will be back with the news 1 o'clock on Monday. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.